Yeah, so this week we're going to be we're going to be laning the fourth of the Arba Parshios, Shkolim Zochar, Poro, and HaChodesh, that we read from Shabbos, Mevorchim, Oder, and on. And this is a Din HaMishnah. This is a Din HaMishnah. I mean, it's noteworthy that the Parshas that we read every week is not such an early takana, in spite of the fact that the takana of Kriyas HaTorah B'tzibur is the takonas Moshe and the takonas Ezra, but they didn't say what we should read when, how much we should read every Shabbos. But these four parashas of Shkolim, Zochar, Poro, and HaChodesh is the takonas HaMishnah. The Gemara Megillah is mavur that in Eretz Yisrael they would complete the Torah only once in 3 years. The Rambam in Hilchos Tefillah brings that minig was still kayom in his time in some places, but the Kriya of the Dalet Parshas is not so, and therefore on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Nisan or the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we read, in addition to the Parshas HaShavua, also the Parsha of HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. Rashi, as you know, in the beginning of Bereshis, brings a midrash of Rabbi Yitzchak lo hoyo tzarich lahaschil elo b'hachodesh hazeh lochem. That really the Torah should have started with hachodesh hazeh lochem. Everything that appears in the Torah until hachodesh hazeh lochem didn't have to be, so to speak, said. Why? Lo hoyo tzarich lahaschil elo b'hachodesh hazeh lochem l'fi shehi mitzvah rishono. It's the first mitzvah that was given to Klal Yisrael. Rashi goes on to explain why the Torah did begin with Bereshis. So HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah rishono. But what is the mitzvah of HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem? So it's interesting that this mitzvah, which is the mitzvah rishono, it's not totally clear what the mitzvah is. Mirashi says in the Dibur HaMaschil HaChodesh Hazeh, Her'eyu Levana B'chidusho. HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed Moshe Rabbeinu as the Levana renews itself. V'amaloi kishahayoreach mischadesh yeh lecha rosh chodesh. This comes from the Mechilta. In other words, the mitzvah is to be mekadesh the chadoshim al pi the moilad halevana. As the Rambam explains at length in the Sefer Mitzvahs, Mitzvah Kuf Nun Gimel. So Lefizeh, the words HaChodesh Hazeh are understood as HaChidush Hazeh. In other words, this renewal. Yeh Lochem Rosh Chadoshim. This should be Rosh Chodesh. Every Rosh Chodesh should be Nikba Be'ez the Chidush HaLevana. As Rashi says in the Dibur HaMaschil Hazeh, Niskashe Moshe al Moilad HaLevana. Moshe wasn't sure exactly how much needs to be seen in order that it should be Rosh Chodesh Be'ezoi Shiur Teira'eh V'tihiyeh Ru'uyo L'kadesh V'heroloi Be'ezba Es HaLevana B'rakia V'amalei Kozeh Re'eh V'kadesh. So HaChodesh Hazeh means this measure of chidush is what makes Rosh Chodesh, and that's a chiyuv on Bezdin to be mekadesh the Roshei Chadoshim. But then Rashi adds ve'ein mikro yoytze midei pshutoi al Chodesh Nisan omaloi, that he was telling him about Chodesh Nisan zeh yeh Rosh l'seider minyan hachadoshim. This should be the first, the head of the count of all the Chadoshim. She'iyah Iyar Korui Sheni Sivan Shlishi. That's the end of the quote from Rashi. It's interesting that Rashi puts the Droshes Chazal and the Pshutoi Shel Mikra as two ways in the reading of HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chadoshim. Really, we could have said that the statement HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chadoshim should be understood in the sense of Chidush HaLevana, according to which we are koivea Rosh Chodesh. HaChodesh hazeh lochem Rosh Chodoshim. And the end of the pasuk, Rishon hu lochem l'chodshei hashana, means that on our calendar, the Minyan HaChadoshim begins with Nisan. Rishon hu lochem l'chodshei hashana. But it seems from Rashi that the Iker Pirush of HaChodesh hazeh, that it means HaChidush hazeh, Chidush HaLevana, is not according to Pshutei Shel Mikra. And therefore, according to Pshutei Shel Mikra, everything it says in this pasuk, all it means is that from now on, from the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the count of Chadoshim begins from Nisan. Now, according to the Droshes Chazal, that HaChodesh Hazeh means HaChidush Hazeh. You should make Rosh Chodesh. So it's a mitzvah to say that Bezdin is Mekadesh the Levana, the Chodesh, Al Pi Eidim, that saw the Levana Bechidusha. But according to Pshutei Shel Mikra, that it means that from here on, the months will be counted from Nisan and on. It's not clear if this is a mitzvah or this is just a notification. In other words, that when we'll find in the Torah, Berishin L'Chodesh Hashvi, the mitzvah of Tkiyah Shofar, HaChodesh Hashvi is Tishrei. In other words, this could be a notification about how we count the months, but maybe it's not a mitzvah. But in the Ramban, it's mefurish that the Pshutei Shel Mikra is also a mitzvah's asay. The Ramban says, Zu mitzvah rishona, shetziva HaKadosh Baruch Hu es Yisrael al Yedei Moshe. L'chein ama be'eretz Mitzrayim. That's why it says the location, that Vayomer Hashem al Moshe v'laharon be'eretz Mitzrayim leimor. Kishar mitzvahs shebetorah hoyu b'har Sinai. So here there's emphasis that this mitzvah was already given be'eretz Mitzrayim. Oishe bo loimar be'eretz Mitzrayim v'loi be'ir Mitzrayim. K'mo hishamru Rabbi Seinu chutz l'krach. It's outside the city. V'hoya roi sheyoimar tchila dabru el kol adas Yisrael leimar HaChodesh hazeh lochem v'goymer HaParsha. Aval Moshe v'Aharon, it doesn't say over here that they should talk to the Jews. It just says Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe v'Aharon. So he says, Aval Moshe v'Aharon heim bimkoim Yisrael. V'amar lahem bimkoim Yisrael l'doyroisa. V'chozar v'amar dabru el kol adas b'nei Yisrael sheyitzavim b'mitzvahs sho l'kachas Pesach Mitzrayim iba'osor. That appears in the hemshech of this parsha. U'lefi midrashoi lochem loymar shekidush HaChodesh tzorich bezdin mumchim. The reason that this is addressed to Moshe and Aharon, and it says HaChodesh hazeh lochem Rosh Chodoshim, is to teach us that Kiddush HaChodesh requires bezdin mumchim, which was the status of Moshe v'Aharon. V'lokach lo yinemar b'tchilo dabru el kol adas Yisrael she'ein b'Kiddush HaChodesh ela Moshe v'Aharon v'kayotzei bohem. Now the Ramban goes on and he says, V'tam HaChodesh hazeh lochem Rosh Chodoshim sheyimnu oisa Yisrael Chodesh HaRishon, that Yidden should count their months from this month on. Umimenu yimonu kol HaChadoshim sheni ushlishi ad tashlum hashana b'shnei masa chodesh. In other words, even though our years begin with Tishrei, our months begin with Nisan. And that is because, says the Ramban Kadesh, zikaron benes hagodol. When we'll be counting the months from Nisan, we're going to say the first month, the second month, the third month. So it's always referring to the first, second, and third month from the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that will be a constant reminder of the Neis HaGodol. Ki b'chol eis shenazkir HaChadoshim yeh haneis nizkor. V'al kein ein lechadoshim shem b'Torah. That's why the Torah doesn't have a name for the months. Elo yoymar b'chodesh hashlishi, v'oymer v'hi b'shona hasheni, b'chodesh hasheni, na'al ha'onon, etc. U'kimoishe tia haschire b'yoym haShabbos, b'menoiseinu mimenu echad b'Shabbos, v'sheni b'Shabbos kasher hafarish, which is, the Ramban talks on the mitzvah of Zochar es Yom HaShabbos l'kadshoy, in Parshas Yisro, in the Aseres HaDibris. The Ramban says that the mitzvah is not only to make Kiddush on Shabbos, but also to remember the Shabbos all week. And that is done by counting the days, Echad b'Shabbos, Sheni b'Shabbos, Shlishi b'Shabbos, which reminds us of the Shabbos every day. Kach is Kiram b'Yetzias Mitzrayim. In the same way, HaKodesh Baruch Hu is arranging that we should remember Yetzias Mitzrayim, b'Menoiseinu, b'Chodesh HaRishon, b'Chodesh HaSheni, v'chulei l'geulaseinu. She'ein ha'minyan hazeh l'shona, she'harei tchila shnoiseinu mitishrei. Im ken, kishenikra l'chodesh Nisan Rishon, l'chodesh Tishrei Shvi, pisroinoi Rishon l'geula, u'shvi eileho. We're always referring to the geula. V'zeh tam Rishon hu lochem, she'einoi Rishon b'shona. Rishon hu lochem means this is going to be your way of counting time, but it's not really natural time, because in terms of natural time, I mean of universal time, the year really begins with Tishrei, but we have a special count of months that begins with Nisan, shenikra loy lezikaron geulaseinu. Now, the Ramban goes on and he says, "Kvar hiskiru rabbeinu zeh ha'inyan, va'amru shemois hachadoshim olu imonu mi Bavel." That the names of the months that we use today, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, we picked that up in Bavel. Ki mitchila lo hayu lahem shemois etzleinu. We Yidden didn't have names for the months. V'hasiba ki mitchila haya inyanam zeichel yetzias Mitzrayim. Aval kasher olin umi Bavel b'niskayim masha omar hakosov. A pasuk in Yirmiyah. V'lo yei omer oidchei Hashem asher helos b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. Ki imchei Hashem asher helov asher hevi es b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Sofoin. Chazarnu likroi achadoshim b'shem shenikroim be'eretz Bavel. Lahazkir ki shom omadnu mishom he'elonu Hashem yizborach. Ki eila hashemois Nisan, Iyar, v'zulosam shemois Parsiyim. The Persian names. V'lo yimotzi rak b'sifrei nevi'ei Bavel or b'Megillas Esther. V'chulei. V'hinei nazkir b'chadoshim ha'geula hashenis ka'asher asinu ad heina barishoina. So the Ramban says that we started using the names Nisan, Iyar, and Sivan because from that point on we want to remember the geula from Bavel. The geula from Bavel. Lo ye'omer oidchei Hashem asher helo es Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. But now we are referring to the months in a way that it reminds us of the geula from Bavel. So it's clear from the Ramban that the Pshutei Shel Mikra is not just that the Torah is notifying us that from here on, when the Torah is going to say HaChodesh HaSheni, it's going to mean the Sheni after Pesach, and HaChodesh HaShlishi is going to mean what we call Sivan. And when the Torah says Barishon l'Chodesh HaShvi, the Kavanah is Tishrei. But it says over here a mitzvah, a chiyuv, that we are mechuyev to count the months from the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim in order to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim. And just like we have a tzivui to count the days of the week, Echad b'Shabbos, Sheni b'Shabbos, that comes from Zochas Yom HaShabbos. L'chor l'fi zeh, we really need to understand, why does the Ramban not count? So it would seem that there are two independent mitzvahs included in this pasuk. One mitzvah is the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, and the other mitzvah is the Pshutei Shel Mikra, that HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chadoshim Rishon Lochem L'Chodshei Hashana, that we should be counting the months from Nisan. So why is it that the Ramban doesn't count this mitzvah in the Minyan HaMitzvahs? Why is it not one of the Taf Reish Yud Gimel or maybe Taf Reish Yud Daled mitzvahs? Be'emes, he doesn't count as a mitzvah the counting of the days of the week either. But over there we can understand that it's under the umbrella of the mitzvah of Zochar Es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadshoy, that includes also the Kiddush that we make on Shabbos and also the counting of the days of the week based on the Shabbos. But over here, why should we not count this mitzvah? Maybe this mitzvah is also under the umbrella of the mitzvah of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. Not clear. It would be possible that the reason that this mitzvah is not counted as one of the mitzvahs is because it's not noiheg l'doros. You know, the Rambam says in the Shoroshe HaMitzvah, and the Ramban agrees, that a mitzvah that's not noiheg l'doros, like the mitzvahs that were only in the Midbar, a mitzvah like that is not counted in the Minyan HaMitzvahs. So, since the Ramban says that once we came out of Bavel, we no longer counted the months based on Yetzias Mitzrayim, so it's a mitzvah shein and a heges l'doros. But that in itself is very shver. I mean, that one of the mitzvahs of the Torah became bottled by what the Navi said, V'lo ye'omer oid, Chei Hashem asher helos Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. So you know that the Rambam establishes 13 principles in Emunah. And one of them is Sheloi tishtana shum mitzvah mitzvahs haTorah. Besides for mitzvahs that lechatchila were given for a time. So Rabbi Yosef Albo, who was one of the Choshev Darshanim and philosophers in Spain, he was nifter be'erech in 1440. So he has a Sefer HaIkrim, where he disagrees with the Yud Gimel Ikrim of the Rambam, and he says that there are only 3 Ikrim. Metzius Hashem, Torah min Hashemayim Eschar v'Oinish. Most of the Rambam's principles he agrees to in principle. He just includes them in one of these 3 principles. But this particular principle of that there will not be a shinui in mitzvahs HaTorah, the Sefer Ikrim disagrees with. And he says that his Rebbe, Reb Chisdoi Kreskas, disagrees with. And he's marich in the Maimer Shlishi about this. And it's actually very interesting because the HaIkrim was one of the greatest defenders of our faith in Spain. This is like in the 2 generations before the Inquisition, after the Gzeres Kuf Nun Aleph, which was in 1391, and he participated in many of the interfaith debates, and as a defender of Yiddishkeit. And this principle, it would seem, is very practically important in order to defend our position against Christianity. It just shows you that Gedolei Yisrael, they didn't accept principles based on practical considerations. And even though his main mission in life was to defend Yiddishkeit against Christianity, he says that this is not a principle of faith. And he writes like this. He writes that Das Rambam zal sheloi tishtana haTorah la'olam loy kula v'loy miktsasa. Al kain some echad min ha'ikrim sheloi tishtana haTorah. But he says that some acharav ha'ikir hazeh el mashenizkar b'Torah loy soiseif olav v'loy sigra mimenu udvarav bazet tzrichim miyun gadol mehechon yotzel loy l'Rabbeinu zal ha'shorish hazeh. It's a very valuable shorish. In Kabbalah, in the Kabbalah, is a save upon him yofis. Yeah. The in ledin yes tshuva. It's not mukhrach. Ki ma shenema b'Torah lo yisleisef olav. Loi bala hazir al klal mitzvah satorah. Elo al tchunas asiyoson bilvad. It's just in how to do the mitzvah. Meaning not to have 3 parshas in the tefillin and not to have 5 parshas in the tefillin. But adding or subtracting a mitzvah does not fall under loy soiseif v'loy sigra mimenu, he says. And then he says, there are those that bring a raya to the nitzvah Teres Moshe, because in some mitzvahs it says chukas oilam or it says l'dorei seichem. It's also not muchach. Because Adarabah, you can say that where it says oilam, it's loilam. Where it doesn't say loilam, it's not loilam. And then he says even more, Pesach and Sukkos, nemar b'chol echad mehem chukas oilam. V'afal pikein amru Rabbi Seinu shekol hamoyad b'teilim chutz mipurim v'yom kippurim. So you see that oilam doesn't have to mean forever. It just means sheloi nevatel oisa me'atzmeinu aval al pi Hashem kvar efshe sheyibatlu. And then he says v'chein matzinu b'yemei Ezra shebitlu minyan hachadoshim inissen. That from the time of Ezra, after the Aliyah's Bavel, we discontinued the counting of the months from Nisan. HaChodesh HaRishon, HaChodesh HaSheni, HaChodesh HaShlishi, shehoyu moinim kain kefi mishpatei HaTorah, lefi shekosuv HaChodesh hazeh lochem rosh chadoshim. The mitzvah Rishonah shenitztavu b'Yisrael. Yeah, the Torah was tzivso Torah limnois hachadoshim inisim b'chol cheshboinoiseihem lefi she'oz yotzu Yisrael mimitzrayim v'hoiso tchilas tzmichas ha'uma. That's when the Jewish people began to sprout. But he says v'chein timnehi haTorah. Gamken kol cheshboinoiseo minis, but v'kasher olu mi Bavel ro'u lasei zeicher legeula hashenis. V'asu ze b'shnei dvarim. Two ways to commemorate the Geulas Bavel. Ha'echad shehinichu ksav ivri ubachru lohem ksav ashuri zeicher asher golu el Ashur v'nigalu mishom v'chein also davar acher zeicher legeula hashenis v'shehinichu mi limnois minyan achadoshim minissen k'moy shehoyu regilim limnois zeicher l'yitzis mitzrayim v'chazru limnois minyan acher lechadoshim v'zeu she'amru Rabbi Seinu shemis hachadoshim alu imoim mi Bavel v'chulei v'chein kosav haRamban. So he's basing his shita on this Ramban. So in any case, he says, and therefore he says that we can say, because and he brings some kind of obscure midrashim that go in this direction. In any case, he bases himself on this Ramban, but the Ikrim is really a pella, because he says, who says that a mitzvah can't become batul al yidei bittul atam? It's mafurish that even al pinavi shaloi b'hiras shah. The Gemara says in Yevamis Daf Tzadik ein shoymin loy. So it says mafurish that even if a navi comes and says that a mitzvah is batul, even so, if it's not a hiras shah, he doesn't say it's batul for today, but he says it's batul from here on, ein shoymin loy. And what he brings that from Golas Bavel, he says they started counting from Tishrei. It doesn't say that in the Ramban, and it's also not true, because since Golas Bavel we gave the Chadoshim names, so it's not that we're counting from Tishrei. We're not counting the months b'chlal. We're calling them by name. So really, in the Pirush HaKosev on the Ein Yaakov, the Kosev is Rabbi Yaakov Ibn Chaviv, who gave out the Ein Yaakov, and he has a commentary over there. So he really attacks the Sefer HaIkrim. He was a contemporary of the Sefer HaIkrim, and he attacks him very, very sharp. He writes, "Uba'avur shechoshav lehitolois be'ilan godel, haloi hu haRamban, ra'isi lichtev klal kavanas haRamban v'yizbar l'chol ma'ayin, ki loi machshivois Rabbeinu HaGodel machshivois HaChocham HaDoresh hazeh." Yeah, they're not on the same page, b'chlal. And he says, Emetz v'yatziv mashikosav harav shemitzvah oleinu b'chol eis shenazkir hachadoshim b'derech minyan sheyachas oisoi minyan roi sheyeh be'erech el chodesh aviv ki bo yotzanim mitzrayim. It's true that whenever we count months, we call them by a number. The number has to begin with the month of Yetzias Mitzrayim. V'shelo yeh rashoi shum ish Yisrael liyachas minyan chodosh be'erech el Rosh Hashanah. Minyan chodesh be'erech al Rosh Hashanah shetchilas Tishrei. V'gam hayoim choiva aleinu liyos nizarim bazeh. Not to call months by a number which is not from Nisan. Aval kriyas shemois hachadoshim, but calling months by a name einoy soisil azeh klal, because we're calling it by name. We're not counting the months. Ubetnai shebechol eis shenazkir minyan hachadoshim Whenever we do say Chodesh Rishon Sheni Shlishi, we have to count it from Yetzias Mitzrayim. And so also the Abravanel in the Parshas HaChodesh says, "V'nirali shaloi avru bazeh al mitzvahs HaChodesh, lefisha gam hein loy nimnu milikroi es HaChadoshim Rishon v'Sheni b'misparim k'mo shetzivsa HaTorah." Avol milvad zeh, besides for calling it 1, 2, 3 from Nisan, kinu es HaChodesh ba'isay kinu shoyim mechanim b'Bovel. Yeah. And Be'emes, it's Mefurish in the Ramban himself, even though over here it's not Mefurish, but there's a drosha l'Rosh Hashanah in the Kisvei Ramban, where he writes, Koloi mashim itchila loy hoyu lohem shemois b'Yisrael, ad sheyotzanu mi Bavel, v'ha'eleinu ha'shemois mi Shom, v'asiba b'zeh, lefi shemitchila nitztavinu limnoisam b'zichron geulas Mitzrayim, u'kshiyotzanu mi Bavel, v'nitztavinu loy mar oid chei Hashem asher helas b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim ki'im, chei Hashem asher helas b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Tzofin, chazarnu likrois chodshenu legulas Tzofin, v'loy sheneshane Hashemois harishonim, v'nishkach gulas Mitzrayim. Not that we should erase the count from Nisan. Elo shenetzarev shom shemois Bovel, lo hidia v'liska sheshom amadnu umisham hoitzionu. So it's mefurish in the Ramban, like the Abravanel and the Pirush on the Ein Yankiv, that we're not talking about being oiker the mitzvah min Torah, but we're talking about adding on names, because we're not mechuyev always to count the months. It's only when we're counting we're mechuyev to count it from Nisan. But when we're not counting, we could call it by whatever we want. But the emes is it's nevertheless interesting, because the Ramban bases himself on the pasuk in Yirmiyah, "V'lo omer oid." Now in Brachos, Daf Yud Beis, the Mishnah says that Ben Zoyme darshans kol yemei chayecha, l'man tiskor es yoim tzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha. Ben Zoyme says kol yemei chayecha is l'rabbis haleilos. That at night there's also a chiyuv zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, not only by day. V'chachamim oimrim kol yemei chayecha lohavi liyemois haMashiach. It says in the Gemara, Tanya, Amalahem ben Zoyme lechachamim, v'chi mazkirin Yetzias Mitzrayim liyemois haMashiach. You're telling me that the kol is marbe, that liyemois haMashiach you have to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim. But haloi kvar nemar, the pasuk says in Yirmiyah, Hine yomim boim ne'um Hashem, v'lo yom ruoid, chei Hashem asher helos b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, ki'im, chei Hashem asher helo, v'asher hevi ezerah beis Yisrael me'eretz tzafoino, mikol ha'arotzois asher hidachtim shom. Amru loi, so the Chachamim say to Ben Zoyme, loi shetei okei Yetzias Mitzrayim mimkoimo, elo shetei shibud malchis ikir v'Yetzias Mitzrayim tofelo. That law said lavoi, the main zechira is going to be the geula from the last golus, and the zechira of Mitzrayim will be a tafel, and therefore the Chachamim hold that the mitzvah of zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim will be noyeg li'mois haMashiach. So it comes out that we have a machlokes between Ben Zoyme and the Chachamim how to read the pasuk of V'lo ye'omer oid in Yirmiyah. You will no longer say does it mean that Yetzias Mitzrayim is completely going to be erased, or it means that it's going to become a tafel. So it comes out that even though according to the Chachamim, the taich is that Yetzias Mitzrayim will be just a tafel, as the Ramban says that in the names that we call the Chadoshim, it doesn't mean that we forgot the count from Nisan. We do count from Nisan when we count. But if we're coming from this pasuk, so we're saying that at least according to Ben Zoyme, the mitzvah of Minyan HaChadoshim from Geulas Mitzrayim was discontinued completely at the time of Geulas Bavel. But Be'emes, the whole thing is really very hard to understand, because it's mefurish in the Braisa that this pasuk is talking about the Geula of Yemais HaMashiach and not about the Geula of Bavel. Because if the pasuk is talking about the Geula of Bavel. So according to the Ben Zoma, the mitzvah of Schiris Yetzias Mitzrayim is no longer noig in our time. And it's mefurish not like that. I mean, they're only having a machlokes if the mitzvah of Schiris Yetzias Mitzrayim is noig in Yemois HaMoshiach, or it's not noig in Yemois HaMoshiach. So how does the Ramban Bechlal bring this pasuk in the context of explaining that from Golus Bavel on, we started calling the months by name and not counting them as Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi from Yetzias Mitzrayim because of the pasuk in Yirmiyah of Eloyei Omer Oid. I mean, it's mefurish in the Mishnah and in the Brisa that the pasuk of Eloyei Omer Oid is about Yemois HaMoshiach. So I think that the truth must be that if you look in Yirmiyah Tes Zayin, Psukim Yud Daled and Tes Vov, it says, Lochein hine yomim boim ne'um Hashem, v'lo omer oid, chei Hashem asher helo es b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, ki im chei Hashem asher helo es b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Tzofar, v'goymer. The Ramban in his drosha clearly brings this pasuk. And in Chumash, there's a little bit of a confusion because there's two words from the other pasuk, as you'll see, but he's basically bringing this first pasuk, which is in Kapitel Tes Zayin. But then there's another pasuk. There's another pasuk in Kapitel Chav Gimel, which is a very similar pasuk, and the Radak already asks why the Navi repeats the same thing twice. So I think that the Ramban is learning that the first pasuk is talking about Golus Bavel, and the second pasuk in Kapitel Chav Gimel, V'lo yei omer oid, is talking about the Geula of Yemois HaMoshiach. And over there it's mefurish, it's talking about Yemois HaMoshiach. It says, Hine yomim boim, Ne'um Hashem v'hakimoisi leDavid tzemach tzadik, which is talking about the Melech HaMoshiach. So Lefizeh, we can say that in the first pasuk, Ben Zoma also learns that the taich is that Yetzias Mitzrayim will become a tafel and Geulas Bavel will become an ikr. This that Ben Zoma says that Yetzias Mitzrayim will be totally discontinued, the Zichron Yetzias Mitzrayim, is because of the yitur of the second pasuk. Because according to him, already from the first pasuk, we know that from Golus Bavel, Yetzias Mitzrayim plays second fiddle to Geulas Bavel. So the second pasuk in Kapitel Chav Gimel can't be telling me that Yetzias Mitzrayim is going to be a tafel. Therefore, Ben Zoma says that the second pasuk must be telling me that Yetzias Mitzrayim will completely not be remembered. And the Chachamim don't agree that the second pasuk tells me more than the first pasuk. But Hamiyah, that the Ikr, that the Sefer HaIkrim was maimed what he said on the Ramban, and what they're asking on the Sefer HaIkrim, it's all really not understood, because it's mefurish in the Brisa that at least in Yemois HaMoshiach, Ben Zoma holds that the mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim will become bottle. So over there you could also ask, how could a mitzvah of the mitzvah Torah become bottle? Why are they attacking the Sefer HaIkrim? And the emes is, it's a Mishnah that in Yemois HaMoshiach will become bottle. The whole discussion now that we're having is about after Golus Bavel, if it became bottle. But so I just want to say, as far as the Iker issue of how a mitzvah becomes bottle, so the Rashba in his Chidushei Agodas in Brachos Daf Yud Beis says, "Ve'im titoin oleinu mi bittul kriyas shema rotzaloi ma yetzias Mitzrayim shehi mitzvah mi mitzvah saTorah." And so the Rashba says, you're going to ask, how is it possible that a mitzvah mi mitzvah saTorah should become bottle? So zog the heilige Rashba da. She'ena kavona rak shenizkor bepeh hanisim she'asa lanu Hashem yizborach she'otziyonu miMitzrayim achar heyoseinu avodim dalei hakoyach v'tacha sivlois melech va'am kosher ve'im aschira azois nikva b'nafsheisenu shu ha'mashgiach v'hayochol shelo yimna'eu moineh mishum tzad. That it's not just that we should remember the story. Remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim is in order that nikva b'nafsheisenu Shuhu hamashgiach v'hayochol, Sheloi yimnoeu moinea shebeshum tzad. V'oid sheteschazik b'nafshoseinu midas habetochen v'chulei. V'tia hakavana ahi yoisech hazokim, ba'oises yoisech hazokim, that with the geula ha'asida, it'll be a stronger raya on HaKadosh Baruch Hu being a mashgiach v'yochel. So hatachlis ahu shamur b'haskirenu am memushach u'memoirot me'amim noiroim min ha'arotzos ha'rechoikis u'mitzofin u'meyam. Okay, so it must be that in spite of the fact that la'osid lovay, we're saying that the kiyum of the mitzvah of Schiras Yitzias Mitzrayim will be with talking about the geula of Yemais HaMashiach. The Ramban is saying that at least on the level of making the Zechira of Yitzias Mitzrayim by counting months, in order to remember Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim, in this sense, that became a tuffle. That became a tuffle to the remembering the Geula from Bavel, and therefore, it's not shver that it's a bittul mitzvah. First of all, it's not a bittul mitzvah because it's only a tuffle, but we still, when we count, and at the same time, we're being mekayim the inyan of the counting, because the inyan of the counting is remembering that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a mashgiach v'yochel, and that inyan is being niskayim also by calling the months Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. You know that the Ramban, nevertheless, if you ba'ayin hativ in the Ramban, he juggles between two ideas. One is that we're not in ganzen mevatel, because when we count, we say Rishon Sheni, and the fact that the mentioning of the names which are based on the Geulas Bavel is to commemorate the Geula from Bavel. You know, in the Birchas HaChodesh we say that this month is going to be Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. We don't call them by number. According to the Ramban, Al Kol Panim B'Toras Tafel, we still count the months from Nisan. So it's a shtickle shver that we dropped the number out of the Birkas HaChodesh. But it could be that therefore we begin with Misha Asa Nisim Laveseinu, V'go Aloisa, Me'avdus L'cheres. Because with that, we're Mekayim the Schiras Yitzias Mitzrayim, together with the Schira of the Gulas Bavel, which we're Mekayim by mentioning the months by their names. But there's still a shverikite over here, because Mela, the Geula of Yemais HaMashiach, is going to be above and beyond the Nisim of Yitzias Mitzrayim, and therefore we understand the Veloye Omer Oid that says in Kapitel Chav Gimel. But the Geula from Bavel was more or less B'derech HaTeva. Why would that outshine the Geula of Mitzrayim? And why would, from that point on, remembering the Geula of Yitzias Mitzrayim play second fiddle? And the truth is that in terms of the mitzvah of Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim, we don't find that the mitzvah was weakened after Geulas Bavel. So it only appears in this particular context of counting the months. HaChodesh hazeh lochem, Rosh Chadoshim Rishon hu lochem l'chodshei Hashana. It could be that has to do with the fact that Geulas Bavel, the Geulas Bavel, was really within a sarusa de l'sato. It was, we participated in making that happen. Yeah, it wasn't benisim gluyim. We bargained for this geula, and not everybody left. So this represents our partnership in Geulas Yisrael, and that is something that, from that point on, you know, from the Geulas Bavel begins the inyan of Torah Shebal Peh, which actually has its fullest expression in Kiddush HaChodesh, which is done by Bezdin, Yisrael the Katshinu Lizmanim, our participation, our doing, and therefore the Ramban is saying that in the context of Chadoshim, there's a special emphasis on the Chadoshim being named based on Geulas Bavel, because that's when the Tkufa of Torah Shebal Peh, in which we participate, began. As I came in Zogen. But in any case, lahalacha, it seems to be ganz klar that if you're making a count, you're not allowed to count from anything other than Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, HaChodesh, Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi. Therefore, if you're writing on a check, let's say 3-2, or 2-3, or whatever date, it's a serious shaila that you're over on the mitzvah of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chadoshim, Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chodshei Hashana. Therefore, like the Kosev and the Yankov says, if you say April, June, you're not over on the HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem because you're not counting. But if you are counting, then you're over on HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chadoshim, and therefore it's Roy L'Dakdek that we shouldn't call the months by numbers. We should call the months by their names, which is not a bittul of the mitzvahs asay of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chadoshim. In any case, the Eibush is the Halfim. We should be zoche that we should usher in the Chodesh and we should be mischadesh in all our ways. A guten Shabbos.